Thank you, Rich. Exactly on time. Now, as the other sessions, we'll save all questions for the panel afterwards. Next is Eric HORVITZ from Microsoft Research.
Good afternoon. I want to talk today a little bit about leveraging an incredible asset available to the community, search logs, for doing epidemiology, diagnosis, tracking illness over time, looking at medication usage. These are logs of people searching the web, putting in queries and clicking on pages. The Pew people a couple of years ago, noted that about 70–80% of people pursue healthcare online. I think it's more than that. 80% of health queries start at search. We recently did an inventory at Bing, back at home base at Microsoft, and found over 10% of queries were health related for several metrics that we looked at, and Google reported the same thing a little while ago. It's a lot of data. So the idea is, can we use online data like search queries as a large-scale sensor array? To do this well, working in the wild with this kind of data, which is often quite messy, brings up several interesting statistical challenges. They're very interesting to us. Models of sensor error, detecting rare outcomes in these large-scale data sets, understanding reporting models, how to use users search, and are they doing experiential searches? They actually have an illness, or is it exploratory? And we've been working on classifiers for that kind of thing. Same is going on in the world of Twitter feeds. So as far as signals about medications, we found that 1 in 250 people query on the top 100 drugs for US popularity. And this brought up the question, can we use search logs as ADR sensors and for studies? And some of this work goes back to conversations with Russ Altman several years ago. He and his team, Nick Tatonetti, discovered, looking at FAERS data, that there was a bump up, it seemed, when patients were taking both Paxil and Provocol, but didn't see that bump in hyperglycemia with patients taking just single drugs. We said, look, I wonder if we can find that kind of effect looking at the web search logs. And so we basically took a set of terms of the kind you would search on if you had symptomatology of hyperglycemia, did a two-step walk, it's called, to generate a set of terms, and then just wanted to look at a year of logs, 6 million people, found 82 million drug symptom condition queries, looked at drug pairs and singlets, and discovered, yes, we see a bump up in the mention of one of those words in queries along with the drugs or in the same session. What we're doing here is doing a disproportionality analysis, a very simple one, looking at people who just search on paroxetine, people who just search on pravastatin over a period of time, and people who search on both, as well as people who search on a set of hyperglycemic related terms. And we want to compute these ratios and compute a reporting ratio score and look at the expected versus what we see observationally, and we see a pretty big bump. Once we had that, we have questions about the value and the usefulness of this signal. So as part of the study, we took 62 pairs of medications, half of which, 31, are true positives, confirmed hyperglycemic reactions from the interaction, and 31 pairs confirmed as non-interacting, do not lead to a bump up in hyperglycemia, and then did a parameter sweep with that disproportionality score across the whole set of 62 pairs. And we can draw a receiver operator characteristic curve and look at characterizing the web, the use of these logs and this methodology as a sensor for these kinds of interactions across the set, and get a sense for how well it's working. We can also look at what, sort of how much do different types of symptomatologies, in terms of all the words people might use, synonyms, for example, contribute to the area under the curve. Now we can actually start looking at multiple models, many of which come from the pharmacovigilance community, as well as other models like this independence model, and generate new kinds of scores and build tools. And so with forgiveness, well, forgive me for using this phrase, but we took the idea of BLAERS and built a tool we call BLAERS for Behavioral Logic-Based Adverse Event Reporting System. So the idea is to build an interactive tool that has the back end of large-scale web search logs that will generate a background symptom spectrum as background for the cohort, and then do a drug by drug for pairwise interactions here, and look at picking one of the scores, what's popping out as a hot spot, and then jumping in and seeing what's popping out as a symptom across with unexpectedly disproportional signal given the background as an interactive tool. Now this work was prodromal to, I think, a deeper dive we did into looking at serious rare side effects, looking at the OMOP workload. This is the 181 drugs, gold standard drug safety test set, many of you know about. Severe rare outcomes in these cases, acute MI, acute renal failure, liver injury, and upper GI bleed. This was done with 2 years of data, a year and a half, 18 months, 80 million users, looking at Google, Bing, and Yahoo searches. We have an anonymous identifier for the browser. The trial design was called a self-control design. Each searcher serves as their own control across the transom of single medication mentioned in a search query. We have a special filter to remove healthcare professionals from the search logs. You can read about that work in our Nature CPT paper. But we actually compute a query rate ratio for each user before and after the medication appears. It's actually like doing a clinical trial of sorts with search logs. We say, okay, here's where the drug is first mentioned in the logs. This is time going to the right. And we see conditions mentioned and symptoms being mentioned. And we have an exclusion period. We want to sort of wash out the effect of thinking about the drug and later seeing symptoms appear, or queries with concerns about conditions or symptoms appear, and then sum up the signals in this gamma period, 60 days before and 60 days after, but do this for all the users in our system. And then apply very similar analyses that are applied to FAERS data these days. In fact, for rare outcomes, we're worried about high sampling variability, given very, very small baseline and observed frequencies of these adverse effects. So we use a nice hierarchical Bayes method called empirical Bayes, and the multi-item gamma Poisson shrinker by Dumichel and Pregobon, which is now the standard of practice, I think, for FAERS analyses these days. But here's the exciting slide. Take-home message here. What you see here are 4 conditions going clockwise: acute renal failure, upper GI bleed, acute myocardial infarction, acute liver injury. And what you see here in blue is how well we can do the detection by web data alone. And in red, from the FAERS reports. And this shows you the area under the curve, but what I want to show here, which are comparable, but I want to show the together. This is why I used complement in the talk title. The fact that these signals, when handled appropriately, provide an interesting statistical opportunity to complement the traditional sources, the traditional data these days in the spontaneous reporting system that the FDA and other agencies across the world provide. So you see better together here, combining kind of a complementary set of signals from the spontaneous reports and the spontaneous queries, you might call it. I'll just stop by saying, I want to end by saying that what really excites me, especially last panel, this panel, some of the topics coming up here, is bridging the online, non-traditional, in the wild data sets we're collecting en masse, terabytes of data coming in, people doing quiet self-reporting in the privacy of their homes and in their phones from their pockets, and combining that with this much sparser data we have, but of course highly curated and clean data in many ways, traditional healthcare like the electronic health record, even the claims data, and making that link to do some studies together to learn more about how to use the web better, how to use these non-traditional sources of data. We just created a system that we're using it for a breast cancer study right now. Some of the work we're doing with looking at the experience with information support for illness over the episodic phases of an illness like breast cancer. But the idea is you go to a web page, you click on a link on this web page if you're part of this study under IRB, and the browser code is sent back to our logs. So we see it appear in Bing logs, and then the patient is giving us, or the whole study with patient permission, 18 months back of all their log searches, and as many months forward as we like the study to go per agreements. And this will allow a really beautiful alignment of the traditional and non-traditional data sources. So this excites me quite a bit. And we're talking with several, in fact, even today, a discussion came up in this room about, oh, can we do this together? We'll try this out with the question that I have in mind, someone told me. So I'll stop there.